Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome back to part 5 of transforming pain and bondage to freedom. Had to remember the title. Today we're going to look into the fifth chakra, and that we'll cover the regions of the chakra as we get going here. Remember this, for those of you that don't have much knowledge or understanding of the chakra system, that's fine. It's a practical exercise, so I'm encouraging you to do the exercise that we will get to here, as I've been doing throughout the series, on your own. It really doesn't matter if you understand or even agree with the chakra system, although there are mountains of scientific research papers out there now validating it beyond a question of a doubt. So if you're one of the people that keeps sending me very ridiculous comments on my YouTube channel, please do your homework instead of making yourself look foolish in the face of science. So the point being is, you don't really need to understand the complex science or any of that. If you understand the issues that we're talking about with each of the chakras, they are main psychological themes that can be found in places like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or the structure stages of consciousness, or in most any good psychology book. And they're the main themes that we all have to work with in our normal waking state, our normal life, and even in the issues that come up that come up in our dreams. So they're psychophysical themes, ideas and ways of expressing ourselves that also manifest as challenges in our bodies if we are not expressing ourselves in heart-centered ways, or being honest with ourselves in relationship to ourselves or in relationship to others. So the fifth chakra is the throat chakra. It sits right here, right in the region of the thyroid and parathyroid, or the Adam's apple. It relates to, so when I say relates to, if there are imbalances of the psychophysical energy flow through that region. Now, it can be physical disruption, such as someone with an injured neck can also have a disruption in the flow of psychic energy, or issues of the psyche or mental emotional issues can lead to dysfunction in the body in these regions. So remember, as above, so below, as below, so above. And this is as common as white bread in a clinical practice for someone with the training to look into these things. And what you see, for example, somebody may have a very hard time expressing themselves in a relationship, but quite by surprise, somebody buys them an hour-and-a-half massage for their birthday. They go see a skilled massage therapist who cleans all sorts of trigger points out of their neck, stretches the scalenes, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, the trapezius muscles, neck rotators, neck extensors, maybe frees up their first and second rib, gets rid of a lot of soft tissue dysfunction and joint dysfunction, essentially, and all of a sudden they can express themselves naturally because they have made a change in the physical structure, which is really the physical end of an energetic structure. So think of a rainbow. At the high end, you have high vibrational energy. We can call that thought. At the low end of the rainbow, the red end, you have physical matter, your body. So the psyche is like a rainbow bridge that ranges from that which is moving so fast it can't be weighed or measured, and the other end is the physical body, which can be weighed and measured. So the areas that correspond to the fifth chakra are the ears, the jaw, the throat, and the jaw, i.e. the mouth itself. So anything to do with your teeth, for example. The voice, any challenges with your voice. Your neck in general. Your airways, such as breathing problems. Your upper trapezius muscles. Your arms. The arms are very, very involved in communicating and creating. Most of us don't try to do sign language with our feet or shake other people's hands with a foot. That's the root chakra. It's a great way to perceive. What would it be like to try to paint, write, draw, or communicate with our feet the way we do with our hands, and you'd get a very distinct difference of how the fifth chakra, the arms and the hands, are very linked to our creative expression of self and relationships relative to the first chakra, which would be dealing with the feet. So the arms are very, very important. We express ourselves, we point things out to people, we show how big or how little something is, we gesture. I might say to my 3.5-year-old, just be gentle with your sister, don't bang on her, and he would understand that as much as he might understand the words. We build things with our arms, so we have, for example, plans to build a house, and so we draw the plans up and we begin building the house. So whenever we're using the fifth chakra, there's almost always some element of voice, which is responding to ideas above and our needs from below, and we are expressing that outwardly through voice and hands. And when we write, we are writing our voice. So we're using our hands to write what our voice would like to be heard through the written word. So we also have the thyroid and parathyroid. The thyroid is very, very much involved in regulating your metabolic rate or your metabolism. The parathyroid has a lot to do with the calcium balance in the body. So in that relationship, it can be related to our bones. It can be related to things like muscle metabolism or muscle contraction. If you look into the actin and myosin filaments and how they work, calcium is very involved in engaging muscle. So whenever you have metabolic problems or problems with calcium, we look to see what's going on with regard to fifth chakra issues. Now, I'll reiterate that none of these chakras works by themselves. This is a very simplistic model designed for YouTube and, public consumption. What I teach in Chek Holistic Lifestyle Coaching gets much more comprehensive, especially in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 3, our advanced training. But for this exercise, it brings your awareness to these areas so you can begin looking into them. And when we look into the darkness of ourselves, we take the unconscious and bring it up into conscious so we can work with it. If it's in the dark, you can't work with it, and it works with you. That's called shadow projection. Now, some of the things that are important that I wanted to share with you is from a Jungian perspective, a depth psychology perspective, and I do a lot of work with depth psychology and have studied Jung for well over 20 years and apply his works in my life and in my work with my patients and clients. Jung shows us that the same-sex parent creates our bridge to the outer world. So for example, my stepfather, my real father, died when I was 8. I didn't really get to see him very much. Left my mother when I was probably 3, 4, I'm not sure, early. But from the time I was about 7 till I left home, my stepfather filled the role of father. And so my relationship, how I express myself in and how I relate to the outer world, is influenced largely by the same-sex parent, in this case, my father. The opposite sex parent is largely influential on what a Jungian would call our soul nature or our inner world, how we speak to and relate to ourselves on the inside. So if I'm working with a patient that has a real challenging relationship with themselves, maybe very judgmental of themselves, caustic, degrading, shameful, ... And if it's a male, then I want to look into how was their relationship with their mother, because the formative forces of the mother or the opposite sex parent, I'm referring to a male in this case, so mother would be the opposite sex. Those relationships are most greatly influenced by the mother or the mother figure if you were orphaned, for example. So if our challenge is with expressing ourselves in the outer world, we may need to heal the relationship with the same-sex parent to find out where our blockages are. If our challenges are relating to ourselves and communicating to ourselves and coming into a state of trust and a willingness to express our creative energy from within, then that we need to look at the opposite sex parent if we're challenged that way. Now, when we look at the levels of consciousness, something interesting appears. The fifth chakra relates to the ears. If you look at how consciousness evolves, which is a very complex topic, I think I've mentioned the book Streams of Wisdom by Dustin DePerna. I won't give you a pile of references because it's very technical material. But what the research in the structure stages of consciousness shows that as our consciousness as human beings has grown and developed, there's different orientations to different parts of our bodies at different times for reasons of survival, largely out in nature. But our ears and our hearing comes from the magic level of consciousness, which goes all the way back into pre-religious times when shamanism would have been what would now have been called religion. And at that level, we're living in the wild. It was a long time ago, so we had to be very attentive to the sounds in the environment to hear what might be a threat and to hear what we were trying to hunt. So at that level of consciousness, we are very, very much looking towards our belief about what is happening in nature, what happens magically in our lives. Your ability to heal is magical, for example. Very few people even come close to having the knowledge to know how a wound heals, or how a digestive trouble heals, or why constipation heals, or why we breathe. So from a structure stage of consciousness level, you would say that these magical inner workings are all related to magic because we don't really know how it works. We're just grateful that it does. So when we're dealing with the ears, that magic level of consciousness is linked to our early childhood. For example, when a child's at the magic level of consciousness, if you take a ball that's got two colors, one half, let's say, is white and the other half is black, and you show them the black side and you say, what color is the ball? They will tell you black. But if you say, are you sure? They will be absolutely sure it's black. But if you turn around and show them the white side, they will be very surprised. They'll think you've done magic on them. So why this is important is because when we're growing and developing in our early years, from birth particularly to about 5 years of age, if we're traumatized in there, then it can have effects on us that can link to our fifth chakra system, our ability to hear well, and our ability to comprehend through spoken word. And if we get too trapped in believing if you can't weigh it or measure it or prove it, then we also can get a rigid mindset and stop listening when magic is speaking to us. For example, you may not believe your dreams, but they're quite magical. You may not believe it when someone says, I love you, because love really is quite magical and you can't validate it scientifically. Then our voice emerges in the mythic level of consciousness, which came after the magic level, and mythic is what ultimately became the basis of all world religions. And we had to communicate to our tribe and to our people what was important, what was the meaning of life, what were our rites, rituals, and practices that kept us safe, how do we engage enemies, what are the proprietaries and improprietaries of our tribe, what is this mystery that we're living in, and how do we manage ourselves so that we can get the most out of life. So myths are really stories about how to live, and they're attempts to explain what was then unexplainable, and we still have lots of myths today. Myth has by no means died. A myth can be stated as something that never happened but is happening all the time. You can meditate on that. Okay? So I wanted to show you that these concepts of consciousness can link right into the challenges that we're having. And when I'm working with patients, I'm looking at where their body's having problems. I'm looking at what chakras involved, but I'm also looking at what level of consciousness is involved. And that helps me narrow down often where to look in their life story, from how did they do in the womb, what kind of challenges were their mother and father having, or their family having, or what was the environment like, how did your parents get along in your early childhood, how did you do in school at different levels, what were challenging experiences that you had. So all of these things are pointers because they're basically part of how we grow and develop. And there's just mountains and mountains of great research on this for people that are unaware of this type of stuff. Ken Wilber talks about this quite extensively, so some of you may be familiar with Ken Wilber's work. Now, when it comes to expressing ourselves, here's my little tree of the chakra system. I spoke about that further previously. When I was in the fourth chakra, I showed you it integrates the fifth, sixth, and seventh with the first, second, and third. Remember, we first have to be conscious of whether we're safe in our natural environment. Once we're safe, then we seek sustenance. We go hunting. Once we are safe and we have food, then we seek procreation. Now, if you look at this from the fifth chakra concept, when we feel safe to express ourselves, then we are hungry. In other words, if we have the time and the energy to do something fun, something new, something exciting, then we're hungry for it. Then we get into meditating on it, or looking through books about new ideas, or talking to other people. Once we get a sense or an intuition, an insight, or our heart compass brings us in a given direction, then we start getting our sexual energy gets excited, and we want to put more energy into it. We want to bring life to whatever the idea is. And if our heart has a measure of love for it, and once we get down here and we start energizing it with sex, the second, fourth, and sixth system all work together. So as we're doing this hungry looking and we get excited about it, we're also opening up insight, inner vision, and intuition, sixth and seventh. So they're pouring down into the heart system. And then once we have that energy and that sense of connection, we're safe, we're hungry, we're passionate, our heart's involved, we've got intuition and insight, then we begin to engage the creative process. So we start moving that energy out of us into the world, either as plans to build a new house, or the new work schedule, weekly schedule we will follow to keep our life in balance, the story we want to write, the art we want to do, the dance we want to dance, the music that we want to compose, etc. So there's a real interrelationship between the chakras. None of them functions alone. And if you go backwards, if you're having a hard time expressing yourself, it could very well mean that you aren't really truly in love with the idea. Therefore, you don't have enough sex energy on it, because you're not hungry enough and you don't feel safe about it. So there's many ways that I can break this down, but these are just some basics. So sometimes we have a hard time expressing ourselves through the fifth chakra without realizing it's because we're not doing something that's really fulfilling us. We may be doing it to please mommy or daddy or the school teacher or our boss, but if we keep doing that, it causes stress, leads to health challenges, leads to relationship challenges. And the pain teacher shows up to guide us into being more honest and to get more clear and to be to develop more awareness of who we are and what it is that we can really do to express our own unique gifts and talents in the world. I believe every one of us is a genius. Every single one of us comes to this world with unique gifts, abilities, powers, ways of relating, ways of seeing, and ways of creating that nobody else has. And ideally, it's the parents that are supposed to nurture this out of the child, but that rarely ever happens. Most kids are just told what they've got to do or else. And that's a great way to build pain in a child and lead it into a life of crisis. But if we really nurture the genius in our children, then they find their path and they make great contributions to the world. And if we haven't had that, then we can nurture that genius in ourselves, and that's what healing is all about. So if we take everything we're talking, we put here on the pendular model, remember the middle path is the Zen way. Previously, you'd have noticed I had Zen written there. Zen means the most efficient way. That's one meaning of Zen. We now look at this in relationship to the fifth chakra, which is the chakra of creative self-expression and communication. And we say, how does my mother function in relationship to whatever challenge I have? If I have temporomandibular joint problems and I don't express myself verbally very well, does mom have that issue? And if I keep acting too much like mom, what will I get in my life? If I'm not enough like mom, maybe she's got some excellent qualities with regard to expressing myself, my creativity and communications in the world. If I'm not enough like her, what might happen? If I have too much dad in me, what might happen? If I don't have enough dad in me, what might happen? If I don't express my creativity and I just live Groundhog Day and stay trapped in myself, what does that look like? Look into your crystal ball. If I'm overly expressive of my creativity, well, then what might that look like? You know, an example of being overly expressive of your creativity is I love to paint. But if all I did was paint and I didn't produce any programs or write any books or develop any courses, then I would either have to become an artist and hope my painting could sell, or I would face ruining the Chek Institute. So there's always a need to balance our creative expression with meeting the needs of the other chakras down below it. And what is our story? Our story is a very powerful thing. In fact, without your story, you might want to meditate on this. What have you got? At the end of the day, your story really is what you use to make meaning. And your story really encapsulates who you are. If you have no story, for all intents and purposes, you're either in a coma or you're not alive. Now, so your story can be very nourishing to you. It can be very supportive. I love my story. It's a challenging story. It's an exciting story. It's a wild story. And if I was reading my own story, I would say this is a guy that really lived. But if I get caught too much in the painful parts, then that can become limiting, because as above, so below. If all I do is focus about how mean my father was and all the things he did to me and my brothers and sisters and my mother, then that produces emotions of anger and stress and resent, and that will eventually just manifest itself in my body. But if I say, well, how did I take the gifts my father gave me and convert those into a story that brings meaning to me and fuels me through the world, then I can say, well, he taught me how to work. He taught me how to solve problems. He taught me how to not complain and get a job done. He taught me not to be a pussy. He taught me to learn from my mistakes, not just poor me, and many other things. So you can see that our story can be very good if it's balanced, but if we're overly anchored in our story, then we're usually stuck in yesterday and not creating something new and magical today. If we undervalue our story, usually we're in a state of repression or denial, and therefore we don't really know what needs to heal or what we should be celebrating. Because if you're listening to this video right now, I can assure you there's lots for you to celebrate, considering about 2 billion people on this planet don't even have food or water or a pot to piss in. So really our goal with each level of the chakras, looking at the areas of the body parts, the themes behind it, such as creativity and communication, is how can my awareness of these key factors, my mother, my father, my creativity, and my story, bring me into awareness of where I'm excessive or deficient, and bring that into harmony so that I can really optimally express my genius and live my dream and add something beautiful to the world. So that's my short lesson for you on the fifth chakra. I would highly encourage all of you that haven't done it yet to go to the Chek Institute and enroll yourself in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which you can do online 24 hours a day at your own pace, because it teaches you the basics that you need to know. It gives you everything that's in how to eat, move, and be healthy and more. Angie, Chek, and I show you how to apply this stuff. And oftentimes we have complex mental, emotional situations, but going to psychologists and psychiatrists to try to address these issues when our bodies are out of balance usually doesn't work very well, because as below, so above. And it's often much easier to change your diet, your lifestyle, and learn how to exercise more efficiently to move energy through you, start balancing you out, and give you the energy that you need for the deeper healing. And many people will find that their unconscious starts to come up in ways that they can manage as they get their body healthy. Because remember, our body is down here in the first, second, and third chakras largely. That's where our animal instincts for safety, security, sustenance, and procreation live. That's our reptilian brain, our brain stem. Those are our survival instincts. So whenever our body's not healthy because we're eating wrong, not getting enough sleep, not moving effectively, not thinking effectively, then the body sort of commandeers our emotions and our mind and pulls them right down into this metaphorical trap. So starting with HLC1 and learning how to take care of yourself and how to hydrate yourself and sleep and breathe, and some basic thinking practices and some essential movement practices can take you a long ways. Also, if you haven't listened to my Evolve Yourself 2019 podcast series, I share a tremendous amount of very practical, useful information right in there. Just go to the Chek Institute website. On the home page it says podcast, or just search Living 4D, Living 4D with Paul Chek on any podcast outlet, and you will find lots of fantastic podcasts with amazing people, as well as my Evolve Yourself 2019 podcast series. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to sharing more with you in part 6 and 7, where we will conclude our series. Thanks.